being with us, because Bob Dean is really an inspiration to everyone.
It's just that people are talking.
Bob Dean, whether you know it or not, kind of dropped out of sight for a while and hasn't been doing too many conferences and not very much radio. And I talked with him recently, and he confided in me that he hasn't felt much like talking because he's been doing so much of it. And I felt the same way, because I have been kind of quiet myself since 9/11. I became very disenchanted with the country I live in since 9/11. But seeing Robert Dean coming back into the speaking circuit was an inspiration to me. So, without further ado, the man I'm introducing, I love and admire, and a fascinating man, and I would suggest you listen closely because he's got a lot to talk about that he knows firsthand. Robert Bob Dean.
I didn't realize that this scoundrel here, Bill Ryan, was going to come up with an overhead projector. So I had to rush up to my room and grab my transparencies. So I've got a few pictures to show to you that I think you might find interesting. I want to say it's an honor to be introduced by someone like Jordan. He's one of the foremost scholars of our time. I've been on this journey for 45 years, but I've been speaking publicly the last 20. And I speak bluntly, openly, and I violate my national security oath every time I open my mouth. And I plan to violate my national security oath tonight. But again, a special thanks for you guys, because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. I'm so encouraged by the people I meet at these conferences, because not only are you open-minded, but you're enlightened and you're enthused, because I think you've learned, as I have, that this subject is, in my opinion, the greatest story in human history. Because it is the story of human history. We're not alone, guys, and we have never been alone. We are members of an infinite universe filled with infinite intelligent life. And we have had an intimate interrelationship with several advanced extraterrestrial intelligences now for, at least 10,000 years. And the evidence is pretty overwhelming that at least one, perhaps two of those different groups had a hand in engineering the human genome over 100,000 years ago. And that evidence is literally overwhelming. Now, we're going to touch upon a whole bunch of stuff, and I want you to understand, I have come to the point in my life where I have become to be almost sympathetic to the government for keeping the lid on this thing. They don't know how to lift the lid on this subject. They don't know how to lift the lid on Pandora's box, because when they lift the lid just a little tiny bit, boom, the whole damn thing is going to come out, and nobody in government is prepared for that. Because the story is so damn big. I know that many of you, probably most of you, are aware of the famous Brookings report. NASA gave a contract to the Brookings Institute in the late 50s. And the basic point was simply this: try to find out what should we do if we, in the future, should encounter advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. And they worked on this thing. Thank you, my boy, thank you. They worked on this thing for 3 years, published it in '61, delivered it to Congress in '61, and they concluded as a result of this study that if we should indeed at some point run into advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, it would probably be a good idea to keep your mouth shut and not tell the masses of people. Now, Margaret Mead was on the committee, and she'd had experiences in the South Pacific with primitive societies where they had been confronted by our advanced culture, and those primitive societies shriveled and died. And the conclusion of the Brookings study was that if we indeed would encounter advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, we probably shouldn't tell the masses of people because, sociologically, theologically, scientifically, it would be a damn disaster. So they published that study, and it literally became national policy. And it's one of the major reasons why the lid has been kept down so tightly on this thing for so long. As I said, it's not simply that we're being visited by guys from other planets. It isn't simply that we're being visited by guys from other star systems, nor are we being visited, from other galaxies. Good God, those are all given. They also learned, and we knew that when I retired in '76, that we're being visited by guys from other dimensions. They're coming through portals, apparently. They create portals, apparently. And they're coming and going from other dimensions. And the more advanced societies we have encountered have been multidimensional. And it's no wonder that our ancestors deified these dudes back 10,000 years ago. I think there are people today who would deify them if they were to confront them and see what they can do and understand where they're from and what their capabilities are. You would think that it was almost godlike to have that kind of technology. So, over the years I have come to a point where I've almost begun to be patient and tolerant of the government's lies. But not quite. Not quite. I'm so fed up with government lies, I don't even know where to start. You too, huh? A couple of people, last week I was over at the Bay Area Conference, and a couple of people said, "What have we learned in the last year since you were here?" And I said, "Well, we learned that we American people elected a black president." Isn't that pretty damned impressive? Who would have ever thought that the American people could elect a black president? Listen, guys, I'm from the last century. That is dynamite to me. And my heart goes out to that kid because he's likable, he's personable, and he's bright. And I wish him well. I hope to hell he can pull it off. He's got so damn much on his plate. But he ain't going to disclose this subject anytime soon, because he's not ready for this. I don't even think he's been briefed yet on what this is all about. You all know the story of what happened to Jimmy Carter, who promised to everybody that when he was elected he was going to release all of the UFO information. He got into Washington and he got his national security briefing. He walked out of his briefing with tears in his eyes. Apparently, the director of Central Intelligence said, "Mr. President, you don't have a high enough clearance, sir, to have access to all this material." Now, can you believe that? The director of Central Intelligence says, "Also, sir, you don't have a need to know." And poor old Jimmy he wilted. And as a result, he never said boo about anything during his 4 years in office. Promises went down the tube. Who was the director of Central Intelligence? Some guy by the name of George Herbert Walker Bush. Now we're beginning to put pieces together here. The puzzle is beginning to form here. Who's sitting on top of this damn cover-up? Oh my. Now, I want to share something with you here. The guys in Spain ask me continually, when is there going to be disclosure? Good God, you guys, when is, it's been years and years and years now. We expect the United States government to disclose this. When are you going to do it? And I said, guys, hold your breath. It ain't going to happen anytime soon because it's too big a story. And then, of course, Greer and Bassett were there at the conference. And, well, let me give you a small parable here. I've got a little parable I've prepared. It's called The Three Stephens and the Apocalypse. That sounds religious enough, doesn't it? Yeah. The Three Stephens and the Apocalypse. I want to now touch upon that word, apocalypse, because that's another word that ticks me off. I am so pissed off at the number of people who misuse that word. Most of my fundamentalist friends, and I have a few, one of the reasons I get so ticked off, you have to forgive me here, I'm getting old. I don't have the patience I used to have. The rumor has been going around that I've turned out to be a mean, rotten old fart. Cynical, grumpy. Well, that's not entirely true. I like to think, as Henry Higgins said, that I have the milk of human kindness by the quart in every vein. But I can't really pull it off. I guess I am getting kind of grumpy in my old age. Guys, I'm getting angry. I really am getting angrier every day when I think about the con job that's being pulled on you and 300 million other Americans on a daily basis, where they are literally conning you to the point they're taking you to the cleaners, they're stealing you blind, and then they're lying to you about it. And I have a list of, I call it my pissed off list. When you're old and you're sitting in retirement, you have to spend your time doing something. So I prepare this list. Top of the list are politicians. And I say repeatedly that you guys have the best Congress money can buy. That bunch of clowns in Washington who think of themselves, call themselves Congress, we should build special prisons for them. I'm serious. I think about half of them should be put up in front of a judge and sent off for 10 years. Because they're a bunch of damn thieves. Not only are they molesting children, and what the hell, the governor of North Carolina, South Carolina, big scandal, his love affair is in Argentina. To hell with his wife and kids, his love affair is in Argentina. And then we've got congressmen who are guilty of the same thing. Some of them are gay, and I'm not putting them down because they're gay. I'm putting them down because they lie about it. Well, as I say, guys, we've got a mess of clowns back there. What is it, as Will Rogers said, the most permanent, ongoing, continuing program in the world of liars and cheats is the United States Congress. And Will's been gone for a long, long time. So I get my dander up. I vent my spleen when I come and talk to guys like you. And I will say this to you, at the next election for Congress and the next one for the president, think carefully about what clowns you want to send off to Washington. I mean, examine them carefully, because they're supposed to represent you, and they're not doing a very good job of it. Okay, excuse me, I do have a tendency to ramble a bit because I got so damn much to cover. Oh, yes. One of the top of my lists is NASA. You know that crowd? Never a straight answer? NASA. This Newsweek came out a couple of weeks back. I'm sure most of you may have seen it. This is a shameful issue. This is a shameful article. In search of aliens, it says. And then it says, NASA is out there looking. Now, while I was in Spain, the Spaniards asked me, just as I was going over there, we were celebrating 40 years of Apollo 11. Gee, that was something, wasn't it? We put a couple of guys on the moon. We're patting ourselves on the back and we're tooting our little horns. Wasn't that great? Wasn't that cool? Weren't we special? And I had to say to some of my Spanish friends over there, you can never trust this damn bunch over at NASA. They did go to the moon, but that was only half the story. The story was what they found when they got there. And the story was what the photographs taken. Now, you probably know this, but in case you don't, I'll tell you again. NASA admitted about 2 years ago, I think about 2 years back, that they had inadvertently erased 40 rolls of film from the Apollo program. And that release went out over the media, and Congress didn't say a word, no peep, no poop, nothing. The media itself, they reported it and off into the wind. NASA says we inadvertently, mistakenly, gee, we're sorry, we erased 40 rolls of film from the Apollo program. Now, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of individual photographs in those 40 rolls. They erased them. Why? Because they showed what they ran into on the moon. They showed what they ran into on the way to the moon. They showed what they ran into when they got there. This has got to go. We can't let that out. But some nitwit in NASA had forgotten that NASA had given a contract to the Japanese Space Agency back in the 60s, probably involving big bucks, where the Japanese, a sharp bunch of guys over there, bought every negative or every shot of every picture taken by the entire Apollo program, and they've got it in their computers in Japan. And NASA evidently forgot that. Now listen, you have to understand something. There are fine guys in NASA. There are good scientists. There's some fine people working there. I'm not putting them down. I take my hat off to them and I respect them. The ones that I'm really pissed off of are the administrators, the policymakers, the politicians. They forgot that they had sold all this to Japan. Lo and behold, I'm at a conference in Tokyo. I was a guest of Junichi Yaoi, one of the foremost Japanese researchers and UFO experts. I was on national television in Japan. While I was there, I was provided some photographs taken by NASA and the Apollo program that the Japanese Space Agency has been sitting on top of for a long, long time. And I'm about to show you a couple right now. Okay, this is -9. This is Apollo Systems A13, yeah, Apollo Systems 13. Now, bear with me till I get this thing up here. Okay. This photograph was taken by Apollo 13. Now, you may remember Apollo 13. It was the one that never made it to the moon. They had a tiny explosion on the way where an oxygen tank blew up, and they were barely able to get to the moon, go around, and barely able to get home. But they were not alone on that trip. And so while they were out in the way, going and coming, they were little windows, and they snapped pictures. This is one picture that was held by the Japanese Space Agency. You can see the Japanese writing here. Anyhow, I didn't bring my pointer. This is the moon, upper left. These two objects here, B and C, are fairly large, circular discs of some kind. But over here, A, which is moving into the scene, here is the positive and here is the negative. I hope you can all see that. The guys in the Apollo 13 capsule. Thank you, honey. Thank you very much. God, you guys are something else. Oh, here we are. Okay, this is a circular disk with a dome. Here's the moon, another disk, but this dude is coming into the picture. And here we are. Here's the photo, and here's the negative down here. This object is 5 miles long. So you wonder why NASA is keeping its mouth shut. How can they talk about something like that? How can they release something like that to you? An object we encountered on the way to the moon that's 5 miles long. Now, just give some thought. Try to consider a technology, a culture, a civilization that can not only build something like that, put it in space, put it in orbit around the Earth, but staff it and man it with how many? I had the pleasure of being on a couple of aircraft carriers. My son is a career naval officer. Spent 14 years on aircraft carriers, Nimitz class, atomic-powered carriers. For those of you who don't know, they are impressive. They're 1,000 feet long. They have a crew complement of 5,000 men. These big nuclear Nimitz-class carriers have 5,000 guys in their crew. They're massive. They're gigantic. They're unbelievable. Now, we were joking one day about it, Eric and I, my son. What kind of a crew would this dude have with, 5 miles? What are they doing over there? What is their pastime? What is their function? What is their purpose? And having been on a Nimitz carrier a couple of times, they're very impressive. Soda fountains, snack bars and all the rest of it to make the guys comfortable, I've assumed that on board an object out there 5 miles long, you have bowling alleys, restaurants, theaters, all kinds of entertainment. Because we've learned over the years that if you're an alien and you are involved in human beings, you need entertainment. So they probably have saunas aboard, and probably the most favorite pastime, I would think, is watching human television. Think for a moment, having watched it yourself, and all of the idiotic crap that goes on TV, and imagine what a bunch of guys from another star system are thinking. They're rolling in the aisles probably, laughing about these unbelievable monkeys down there, and they're watching our stories, Dancing with the Stars. And they are supposed to think of us as being intelligent and advanced and sophisticated. Oh my. Okay. This is the first shot. Here is the second one. This is -10. Okay. Now that big dude has moved over into the middle of the frame. And another object has showed up over here, was estimated at being 2 miles long. But this one, 5 miles. Here is the print and here is the negative. It's the same object, but it seems to have had moved somewhat. We're not getting a full side view like we did in the other picture. We're getting a little elongated. And there are a couple of circular disc-like objects here. Apparently, it's like a carrier. It puts its aircraft out and brings them back. And it's probably a carrier for discs, alien discs that we find in our skies all the time. But again, when you start considering the magnitude of the size and the implications of what it means, then you can almost sympathize with the authorities about, we can't tell those people these things. No, they're not ready for it. No, hell, they weren't ready for it. They're the ones that were scared to death. You guys can probably handle it, but they can't. That was only the beginning of the story. Over the years, I've been fortunate in that I have been lucky in finding smart people in the most unlikely places. I'm speaking at a conference at the Bay Area a number of years ago, and a little dude shows up by the name of Norman Bergeron. Norman retired from NASA after almost 30 years. He was an engineer and a photographic expert, and he was responsible, he and a number of others were responsible in putting together what they called the Voyager program. Because in the late 70s, astronomers and guys in NASA had discovered some anomalous things happening in the rings of Saturn. I love that word, anomalous. Things were happening, they didn't know what the hell they were. They didn't know how to explain it. So what they did, they put together a multi-million-dollar program called Voyager. And they sent Voyager to the rings of Saturn in 1980. And when Voyager 1 got in the rings of Saturn, it began taking pictures, and the pictures were sent back to NASA, and they were astounded. Literally astounded. They got stuff they didn't expect. Now, before I go into detail about these photos, I will tell you that Norman Bergeron, little dude about 5 feet tall, you know, pink cheeks, little bow tie, brilliant as hell. Last year when I saw him at the Bay Area, he was 87. I have been unable to reach him. I've tried through the phones, my wife tried with the computer. Can't reach Norman. I don't know whether he's passed over, gone home, or what happened. All I know is that last year in the Bay Area, I introduced him, and they mobbed him, and the little dude had a box of books. And after I introduced him, he got mobbed, and he sold every book he had at $50 a pop. But Norman was what I say. There are some good folks in NASA. Honest men who would like to tell you everything they've learned and everything they know. So anyhow, Norman, after frustration and time passed, 1986, Norman decided to blow the whistle and publish the photographs that Voyager 1 took in the rings of Saturn. He couldn't get his book published in the United States. I wonder why. U.S. publishers wouldn't touch him, wouldn't even talk to him. The little dude had to go to Scotland, Aberdeen, Scotland, to get his book published. And that's the cover of his book. And it may be available, you maybe can find a copy if you try, here, there, or wherever. I hate to tell you what they might cost now, because they're real collector's items. But I was delighted that I was able to discover him and present him to the conference in the Bay Area last year. The response from the audience was overwhelming. His little face lit up, and he gave me a big hug, tears in his eyes. But he published his book in Aberdeen, Scotland, and it is a dynamite book. Now, on the cover, this you see here on the right is part of the B ring of Saturn. You know, there are A, B, C, there's a whole bunch of rings. Gigantic. Saturn's a giant planet, and these rings are incredible. This thing here, self-luminous, obviously artificial construction, obviously under intelligent control, because it moves around in the rings of Saturn, and they don't know what the hell it is, but it's larger than our moon. An intelligent, constructed, artificial object, larger than our moon, moving around throughout the rings of Saturn, wherever it will go, and we get a picture of it and we don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to respond. Bigger than our moon. Ah, that's only part of the story. Oh, here we go. This is in the A ring. And the statistics on this will blow your mind. This object here is an artificially constructed, as Norman says, NASA called it an electromagnetic vehicle. That dude is 2,000 miles long. Over 450 miles in diameter, but 2,000 miles long. And here is another self-luminous artificial object about the size of our moon that apparently moves here, there, and everywhere, wherever it'll go, obviously under intelligent control. But consider this thing. Consider the civilization, the technology, the culture that can not only build something like that, but put it in space, move it here and there, wherever they will, for whatever purpose. Norman says he thought they were making the rings, which is why he titled his book, The Ring Makers. I said, Norman, do you ever stop to think they might be mining the rings? We've concluded from several missions, the Voyager 1 was only the first of a whole bunch of them, that the rings are made up of minerals from perhaps God knows how many eons back when the planets were being formed. And I said, stop to think about an advanced technology. They could mine those rings, and those minerals are gold mine, you know. Talk about nutrients. You've got all that good stuff. And he says, you know, I didn't think about that they might be mining them. God, I wish I knew what happened to Norman. I just lost track of him. But his book is a monument to the fact that there are some decent men in NASA who want the truth told. Now, I want to ask, show of hands, how many of you are overwhelmed and shocked at these facts about those objects out there? Oh, a few. Overwhelmed and shocked. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, I was overwhelmed and shocked the first time I saw it, and the first time I began to put it together and considered what it meant. Because there's what we're getting to the important thing here. What does this mean? Now, I assume most of you are aware and familiar with a brilliant educator, physicist in New York by the name of Michio Kaku. Brilliant young man, a quantum physicist, theoretical physicist. Michio has come up with what he considers to be a possibility of 4 different kinds of advanced civilizations. Type 1, 2, 3, and 4. You, by the way, are members of a 0-0 type civilization. Not that you didn't know that, but you haven't quite reached type 1 yet. And the conclusion many of us have reached is that we're looking at the results of at least a type 2 civilization. Now, how do these guys out there look upon us? Really do. How do you think they think of us? I have a pretty good idea because I've been getting some legitimate information from American military and scientific people who have not only met some of them from out there, but are working alongside of them in United States government national laboratories like Sandia, Los Alamos, Brookhaven National Laboratory in Long Island, which is one of the most super secret laboratories. Anyhow, we have scientists and military guys that have been working alongside of some of those dudes, and they are in our midst. When I retired, we knew of 4 different groups, and they were all humanoid. But they were all not the kind of guys who could walk up and down the street on a Saturday afternoon without being seen or responded to. But one of the groups of 4 looks exactly like us in the sense that it could be sitting here in this auditorium next to you and you wouldn't know it. Next to you in an airplane or a restaurant or a theater. They're in our midst, guys. This one group particularly is in our midst. And apparently since 1954, when Ike met them at Muroc Air Force Base in California, they've been working with us, trying to help us make that transition from adolescence into adulthood. And why are they doing that? Well, apparently this is the same group that had a hand in engineering our genetics 10,000, 100,000 years ago. And if you want a little history on that subject, read Zecharia Sitchin, which I suspect most of you are familiar with. His stories are shockingly accurate in the fact they literally tell the essential story of our beginnings. They translate these ancient cuneiform tablets from Sumer. Zechariah is not the only one. There was a brilliant Englishman with the name of Christian O'Brien who went home a year or so ago. Christian O'Brien wrote a beautiful, unbelievable, powerful book called The Genius of the Few. If you can ever find that somewhere, get a copy. Christian O'Brien said essentially the same thing Zechariah has said. We were genetically engineered, and they've been coming and going, and they've been in our midst for a hell of a long time. And somebody said to Sitchin one time, Zechariah, when are they coming back? And he said, whatever made you think they ever left? And I don't think they did ever leave. Now, again, this is, I think, a little shocking information here. At least it shocked the hell out of me. Now, when I was in Germany at a conference some years ago, a Russian cosmonaut by the name of Marina Popovich handed out a few copies to me and Michael Hesseman, another researcher, friend of mine, that the Phobos, Soviet Phobos mission took on Mars when it was out there 15, 20 years ago. The Soviets sent this fantastic mission to Mars. They named it Phobos 2 because Phobos 1 is one of the moons of Mars, 12 miles in diameter. So they named their space mission Phobos 2, and they took a whole bunch of pictures. One of the pictures they took, which Michael Hesseman published in his magazine, is apparently a city the size of Chicago under the surface in Mars, generating an enormous amount of heat, because this photo was taken in the infrared. It's in German at the bottom here, but Michael had published it in his magazine. From Phobos 2, a city under the surface of Mars the size of Chicago. You can see practically, the blocks, the streets, so on. So yes, Virginia, there are Martians, and yes, they are on Mars, and some of them are probably here, because we apparently don't look that different from each other. But you'll never see this published in an American newspaper or an American magazine. Had to be published in Germany by Michael Hesseman. Phobos took another picture. While it was in orbit around Mars, and the story I was told is that they literally planned to land on Phobos, the moon. Well, they never got there. Because while they're in orbit around Mars, this thing came up from the surface of Mars, gigantic in size, and apparently bumped Phobos 2 and knocked it out of orbit, and down it went. So there's somebody up there who says, no, 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 no. You can come and peek, but then you can't stay very long, and you're not going to take that many pictures. We're not going to allow it. Okay. I think that does my photographs for you this afternoon. I don't know where the hell the turn-off button on this thing is. Maybe Bill can find it. Anyhow, I'll leave it. Now, as I said to you, I'm ticked off. I have this pissed off roster, which is a work of joy and pleasure for me. As I said, politicians at the top, particularly the United States Congress, they're a bunch of clowns. They literally run a circus back there. Theologians are right next, below. Forgive me, I'm not anti-religious. I simply don't like religion because it tends to divide people. It separates people. My God is better than your God. My book is better than your book. My story is truer than your story. And so on, and so on, and so on. So I'm not religious at all. I've studied them all. I've studied Hinduism, I've studied Islam, I've studied Judaism. I was raised a Christian. I've studied Christianity. I consider the young man from Galilee my best friend. But that's another story that I don't think we have time for me to get into. I went through a series of hypnotic past life regressions a number of years ago. And one of the lives that I discovered was in Galilee 2,000 years ago with him. So I say he was my best friend and he still is my best friend. Anyhow, I'm not anti-religious. I respect the people who are sincere and honest about it. But it does tend to separate people. It divides people. And I try to promote the concept of a spiritual approach to life. If you human beings had the slightest idea of what you are, my God, you're incredible. You are all of you masterpieces. You really need to know what Yogananda said. You need to reach a state of self-realization when you recognize that within you burns a spark of pure divinity. And it don't matter what church you go to, or what language you speak, or what politics you are, or what color your skin might be. That don't matter. You are divinity in itself. You are part of that infinite spark, which my friend from Galilee said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And the gang back there didn't really grasp what he was talking about. But his truths and his words are as legitimate today as they ever were. And you guys are getting there. You're beginning to pay attention. You're beginning to wake up. Now, as I said, my pissed off list goes down, you know. We had NASA, the politicians, the theologians, and then there's the American mass of people, the public. What is it they used to call the great unwashed? You know, Joe Sixpack. Listen, I have to be kind with Joe, because at the moment, bless his heart, he may have lost his job. He may be losing his home. He can't pay his bills. He's got kids to send through school and educate and buy clothes for. So I'm trying to be gentle with Joe Sixpack, because he's carrying a heavy load right now. I mean, there are tens of thousands of them out there, all over the country. There may be some of them in the audience here tonight, and you probably know a few of them, and they're damn fine people. So I'm not trying to fault them too much, the fact that they're not paying attention. I get a little ticked off of, NASCAR, basketball, football, tennis, golf. My God, these fixations with these little balls, you know? Freud would have a ball with that, you know, no pun intended. Old Sigmund would have a real fine time working that out. Okay. Forgive me for wandering. It's important that I get some of this stuff. One of the things that I fault the average guy out there is for his attention span. He seems to be suffering, the masses of them seem to be suffering what they call attention deficit disorder. Now, it's a problem the kids in school have. They can't seem to focus on anything more than 2 or 3 minutes, and then they're off somewhere else, And I blame television for that, as well as their parents for allowing them to do that. How many of them sit down and read a book these days? Anyhow, their attention span is very, very limited. And the public at large has a limited attention span. For example, let me get back here, go back a few years. Wernher von Braun said in 1959, now get the year, 59, 5 years after 54. Now what the hell happened in 54? Well, something unusual happened at Muroc Air Force Base in California in 54, where an aging president had an encounter that literally damn near killed him. Because right after this event in 54 at Muroc, the poor old dude had a heart attack. He was not able to deal with this thing. Anyhow, in 1959, a famous Nazi by the name of Wernher von Braun, who literally built our Saturn V program from the ground up, had this to say, and this appeared in several U.S. newspapers. I kid you not, this was published in newspapers. Wernher said in 59, "We find ourselves faced by powers which are far stronger than we had hitherto assumed, and whose base is at present unknown to us. I cannot say more at present. We are now engaged in entering into closer contact with those powers." Now, wouldn't you have thought that Wernher would have been mobbed? Explain this? What the hell are you talking about? Who are these powers that you're referring to? I mean, you're one of our top scientists. You're building the Apollo program for us. This is in 59. No major response. Like, it just went over. 1980. Another German professor by the name of Hermann Oberth said this, and this was quoted and published in several American newspapers. "We cannot take the credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped by the peoples of other worlds." Now, did this cause a ripple? Did people say, "What the hell are you talking about, Professor? People of other worlds? What?" Yeah. It cries out for answers, and there weren't any, and nobody made a deal out of it. And then here we have something in 1987. A prominent American senator from Hawaii, Daniel K. Inouye, United States Senator from Hawaii. He said this in a committee, and it's in the congressional record. There exists a shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, and its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances and free from the law itself. And this is in the congressional record. And did that cause a response? Did people mob the senator and say, "Senator, what the hell are you talking about? This is dynamite"? Attention deficit disorder. Allen Hynek said before he died, a series of events occurred in New York along the Hudson River some years ago, called the Hudson River events, where gigantic triangular and boomerang-shaped objects a mile and a half along across hovered over the Hudson River, moved slowly up and down the Taconic Freeway there, hundreds of people going up and down, guys pulling off the road, looking up and seeing this damn thing. It was gigantic. It hovered over the Indian Point nuclear reactor for an hour. All the alarms went off. All of the security people responded to this thing, and it took place. And not one word from the authorities about this, except some stupid-ass idea. A bunch of guys were flying little planes around at night in formation. The FAA, to its eternal shame, said things like that. Oh, these guys were flying around in their little airplanes, you know, in formation at night. Never mentioning that this was a total violation of FAA regulations, as if those little guys in little airplanes could match something that's a mile and a half across, a boomerang, a triangle. Attention deficit disorder. It goes on and on and on. Where am I here? As I say, I tend to wander, forgive me. Okay, I've given you your little parable. I talked about David Froning. I talked about Ben Rich. I quoted Inoue, von Braun, Oberth, the shadow government. Oh, I want to touch upon one little other thing here. There's an amusing situation that has taken place. I find it amusing and I find it tragic. There's a young Brit by the name of Gary McKinnon. Many of you, I'm familiar with this story. Gary, it seems, is a computer nerd. He's a real genius. He's a hacker. Well, Gary happened to be able to hack into the Defense Department computers here about a year ago, a little over a year now. He hacked into NASA's computers a little over a year ago. And he come up with some stuff that was dynamite. And so what happened is that we found out about it and we got a hold of the Brits and we said, we want that man and we're going to put him on trial and we're going to stick his ass in jail for 70 years. And so help me God, the British agreed to extradite young Gary McKinnon to the United States for trial and sentencing. Now I stand curious to see what kind of a trial they plan to put on for McKinnon. It's got to be a public trial. He's not a U.S. citizen. They're charging him with a violation of our computer security systems and all the rest of it. So this kid's being sent from the UK over to the United States, and they're going to put his little butt up in front of a judge and a jury and charge him with damage by breaking into our NASA and our Defense Department computers. I and others have said they should hire the kid, for Christ's sake, and put him to work. If he can crack, hack into those computers, he must know what the hell he's doing. But let me just touch lightly upon what did Gary McKinnon come up with? What did he download when he hacked into those computers? He apparently downloaded some stuff, packaged up the material and turned it over to a British researcher by the name of Timothy Good. Now, Tim, for many of you who know of him, he's probably one of the top researchers on the planet. He's a brilliant young man. I say young, he's about the age of my son, about 57, maybe close to 60. I'm sorry? Anyhow, Timothy Good apparently was the recipient of some of this downloaded material from McKinnon. McKinnon says, I got some dynamite here. And he gave it to Timothy Good with the idea that maybe Timothy eventually could publish it. Now the question is are they going to try to extradite Timothy Good to the United States and put his butt in front of a jury and a judge? But we don't know. The Brits I met in Barcelona told me that the story is pretty definite, pretty true. But what is McKinnon download? Let me just touch upon a couple of things. Orders, military orders, transferring a commander from one vessel to another vessel. Now the vessels were named USS Curtis LeMay. And the other vessel that this guy transferred to, this commander, was the USS Roscoe Hillenkotter. Now, Curtis LeMay, most of you are well aware, is dead now, one of our top 4-star Air Force generals who bombed Japan back to the Stone Age, practically, because Strategic Air Command. There is a vessel named the USS Curtis LeMay, and a commander transferred from that to the USS Roscoe Hillenkotter. Now, Roscoe Hillenkotter is dead now, but he was a 4-star Navy admiral who was the first director of Central Intelligence. Now, the guys, the researchers, have gone to the records, and there ain't no listing of vessels with those names in the entire U.S. Navy manifest. So the question arises, my God, where is LeMay, the Curtis LeMay? Where is the Hillenkotter? And the inference we're getting is that apparently they're in orbit somewhere out there. And now we're talking about one of the biggest secrets of all time, where your missing trillions have probably been going. There is a separate space program which you guys are paying for. And they're not telling you anything about it. And as a result, NASA is a bit of a joke. We have a special space program, and it is apparently known as the United States Aerospace Command. And it is a joint service agency. That means it includes Navy, Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, and it also includes the British Aerospace Command. They launch satellites from several different positions on the planet. They maintain, apparently, an entire fleet of vessels in orbit. And they have anti-gravity and zero-point energy, which you guys have a right to and you ain't gonna see for another 10 years. Now that's where your missing trillions are gone. You know the story. 98, 99, and 2000, 1.7 a year for 3 years disappeared off the books. That bunch of clowns in Congress, you think there was an uproar? You think there was a demand for answers? Where did that money go? Forget it. Now, the day before 9/11, the Secretary of Defense says, we're missing $3 trillion. We can't account for it. It's off the books somehow. We're working on it. Maybe an accounting error. You know how they are, double speak. George Orwell would be happy with this crowd. Missing $3 trillion after the already missing of 1.7 a year for 3 years? There's where the funding is coming from your aerospace command that Daniel Inouye is talking about. A separate shadow government that you have no idea exists. And those guys have got the technology that Ben Rich says is 100 years beyond establishment knowledge. And really, if you talk about being pissed off, that kind of information drives me up the wall. And I say to you guys, and I hope you're as pissed off about it as I am, we've damn well got to get some answers from these idiots back there, or our country is gone forever. And I don't want to see that happen. When I went into the military, I signed an oath to die for that Constitution if I had to. And I believe in that Constitution. It was a work of genius. The best form of government's ever been devised. And they're trashing it. And we're not standing up and defending it enough. We're not insisting that they account for being in office and drawing those big salaries. Okay, guys, I've covered a whole lot of stuff here. As I said, I tend to wander. I guess it's the name of the game. I'm coming to the end of my presentation here. As I said, I've been speaking out rather bluntly and loudly for a number of years on this subject. As I said, it's the biggest story in human history, because it is the story of human history. It's your story. It's who you are, how you got to be here, and where you're going. And I've told you that I'm outraged at the doomsayers. Oh, God, in 2012, we're doomed. It's all over. They're asteroids, whatever. Pole shift, we're all doomed. That Mayan shaman in Germany years ago told me, he said, you white-skins, you do it every time. You screw it all up. He says, that's not what the hell the story is. He says, I'm an expert on my calendar. I'm an expert on the history of my people. And that's not the end of the damn world. It's the beginning of a new age. He says, we look forward to it with anticipation and excitement. The old world is coming to a close, and a new way of thinking is coming. And it's going to be so unlike anything that's ever existed before. He says, we are so excited about the future. 2012, that day will come and go. It'll be the end of our long count, but so what? What's important is there a new age coming. And you guys are all a part of it. And I say in closing that there are going to be some difficult times ahead, because we are literally in this transformation, this transition that is a transformative transformation, not only of the planet but of the human species. And it's primarily spiritual in its nature. And that is a very hopeful thing to discuss and understand and accept. As I said, we're phasing out of a phase of adolescence. We are going through adolescence, and we're going to reach adulthood. And if you all remember, I'm sure you do, adolescence was not a hell of a lot of fun. I found it painful as hell when I was going through it, and so did my mother and father while I was going through it. But we're making that transition. And it's hopeful and favorable, and I want to leave you with a remark or two that I think is important. I'm a great fan of Leo Tolstoy, one of my favorite authors. He was a mystic, tremendous, great writer, philosopher. And Count Leo Tolstoy said, and I quote, "There is something in the human spirit that will survive and will prevail. There is a tiny and brilliant light burning in the heart of man that will not go out no matter how dark the world becomes." And I want to leave you tonight with that comment about that spark of divinity that burns brightly within each and every one of you. God bless you, and good night. Good night.